a couple minutes to bring up the paper, but I will bring that up. So I'm hoping you guys can see the chat. And I think, was it Miguel asking this question?
I think so.
Okay, so I know Miguel Angel, I was on a email with you. If Miguel Angel's on this call, I think a lot of people have been asking about genomic data. So let me just bring up that paper. But in the meantime, Maxime, do you want to kind of get us started with our discussion today?
Yeah. So let me bring up, let me leave the other meeting. That makes things easier.
By the way, did we miss something? Was there a general? It seemed quite confusing because a number of people came directly here.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry about that. There was a general meeting where we had our normal 15 minutes of updates, and then we all broke out into our individual sessions.
Oh.
But I were at the general meeting, there was nobody there.
Yeah, we went to the general meeting through Teams, and there was nobody there.
But typically, Craig posts a link, and he didn't put that link in his email. So I think people that probably have the guest after their name don't. I'm not sure what's the reason, but I know I don't see I have to come in through Craig's link.
Yeah, so he doesn't open up a meeting on the general channel anymore. I think they were having problems with people continually opening up meetings. So he has separate links that get sent out. And I think they just maybe got lost in Outlook or something like that. Because there was a general, and then he sent out additional invites for the breakouts. So I'm sorry about that. Okay.
Let's see, maybe to get us started.
Yeah, definitely.
First at the current collaborations. Just get an overview there, and I'm wondering who is contributing where, or where's the main interest maybe. You should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Check. Yeah, so this is the current working groups around data standards. So of course, Clair is leading the CDM working group with a subgroup in there for the vocabularies. Where recently we worked on version 5.4 and also making the whole release process of the CDM more transparent and easier to manage.
Must have for anyone going back to school.
And besides that, we have several, what we call here, subdomains, where we have for specific domains of health data, specific working groups. So there's the EHR working group led by Melanie, if I'm not mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Clinical trials working group led by Hamed. Looking more at research data and how we can map basically the CDISC SDTM to OMOP. Then we have the oncology working group looking at specific disease area, which are actually quite far along. And one of the extensions they proposed, the episode table, that is now part of version 5.4, the main OMOP CDM. Then we have the registry working group, which I'm leading myself, which started actually from the UK Biobank data to collaborate around mapping that particular registry to OMOP. But now we have spinned off basically towards a more generic registry working group to set conventions around that, share experience from multiple registries are at the moment being mapped to OMOP actually. And lastly here, the genomics working group that, and I think this is the link to the article that you were looking up, Claire.
Yeah. So I've had actually quite a few people contact me recently about genomic data. So I don't know if everybody's getting genomic data or if I know I also had someone contact me about following the COVID strains. So I don't know if that's also included in this genomic question. I know that's a little bit different. It's not necessarily a human genome. So I put a link to the paper here because the working group has actually been retired because we felt like we did what we needed to do. And at the time, which was a few years ago, we didn't have that many collaborators with genomic data besides people in Korea and then like maybe some specialty sites. And then some of our oncology partners. So we found that we didn't have as much data throughout the community so that it didn't make sense for us to continue with a large working group. But if anybody here is interested in reopening that working group, by all means, feel free to do it. It sounds like there's more data now than there was a few years ago. So we'd be very interested to, to open that back up and start talking more about those standards around genomics.
And I do believe to add to that, actually, there's also a genomics subgroup within the oncology working group.
Mm-hmm.
But that might be very specific to somatic genome. I'm not no expert there.
I'm not sure. Yeah, that was part of the reason why we retired it, because there were some, like, I am not very familiar with genomic information at all. Yeah, so it sounds like Juan Manuel, you are interested in the GCDM. So if you'd like to start that working group back up, that would be great.
I do believe to note, and this is a nice also step to the future collaboration. There has been a lot of discussions about the GCDM and how do we want to represent genomic data in OMOP? Will there be tooling around genomic data in OMOP, specifically around things that also tools like, one tool I know is CBioPortal that really specifically has visualizations, tooling around genomic data. Is that the way we want to go with OMOP? So that's a question. Was it Mark? You brought it up. Is that something you're looking into to develop also tooling upon that data standard, upon that GCDM?
Have you guys talked to Chan from Korea? Because I believe he leads the genomics subgroup under the oncology group.
So we've been referring people to Chan, yeah, for sure. And like the paper that I put in the chat, we wrote with like the Korean colleagues, I think Professor Park and Chan. So I think anybody who at least that I come in contact with, I try to refer them to Chan, definitely. But maybe that we need to bring him in more formally and ask if he wants to create like either create a larger working group or collaborate with others, who want to create a larger working group.
The oncology working group has a very rich GitHub page as well.
Yes, they do.
Claire, can I ask? I'm just curious. Before before the working group was stopped, this is Anthony, by the way. The support for the genomic data, was that modifications to the CDM or adding additional tables to go along with the CDM? So this is like conversations we had before. I was just curious how far it got and what decisions were made. Thanks.
Yeah. So it is they describe it as the GCDM. So it is a set of genomic tables that would essentially be an extension to the CDM. So additional tables, I don't believe there were any alterations to any existing tables. If any, it might be a couple columns just to facilitate linkages between the extension tables and what I think of as the canonical CDM tables. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. And that's such a great idea. So then you have this core CDM that doesn't change except for the, agreed upon releases. And then you have like these extensions that are approved. That's actually really great and introduces a lot of flexibility. Awesome. Not that I have a background in genomics. This is more of a general question of how do we support some of the newer technologies, whether it's genomics or imaging or anything else. Awesome. Yep. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And Michael put in the chat the current forum discussion. So if you guys want to head over there, it sounds like there's a lot of people interested. So there's some discussions going on.
I do really want to add a word of caution here. So these tables have been added. I think since then, since this has been proposed, there has some rethinking on how to represent genomics data in OMOP. That we maybe should go to actually not add tables and just concepts, so add vocabularies. I just want to show that if you look at Athena now, that there is a whole vocabulary OMOP genomics, which are actually measurement concepts. So
and they are variants, right? So what we kind of list there is a variant to a gene. And primarily it's oncology right now.
Yep.
Well, actually only oncology.
Yep. So I assume that forum thread also is about that. What granularity of genomics information do we actually want to store in OMOP? I mean, is it for variants? Is it point mutations, SNPs? Yep. Thanks for sharing that, Michael, but also the forum thread. Right. Oh, this is the article, by the way, on the GCDM. I was wondering, any subdomains that are missing here? People that are looking at specific data types, specific standards, disease areas that they want to add to this list.
I think there's the psychiatry working group. I don't know where you guys fit that, but the psychiatry working group does. They were looking at, like, I think they updated the vocabulary. They're looking at talking about how to extend the model to take into account like 3-dimension measurements, right? Because our measurements right now don't do 3-dimension imaging. And then the other one is imaging. I mean, there's always talks about imaging, but I don't think there's a working group for it.
Oh, they just talked about it at in the general call. So Paul Naji and Chan.
Yes, oh, that's true. Yes.
Yeah. So they just started that. So thank you for reminding us, Mui. Yeah. So
how about the medical device one? Because I know Chan was talking medical device as well.
Yeah, we could put that here for sure. I think, yeah, we could put that here. I think.
I don't know how that one is. Is it just really on the use of medical devices or more of the data standards, right? That one I don't know.
Yeah, so I think they've been kind of they've been really great at connecting medical device experts from different areas and different specialties. I think so. I think ASIA has been doing a very good job, and they have requested a couple things in the device exposure table itself for sure. But I think there's still questions around, at least from what I've heard, if the OMOP CDM is set up to properly conduct device research. And so as far as I know, we have not received any more standard suggestions to change the way we're representing that data. And I think they're kind of talking through what currently exists like in the FDA, and there's some other like major medical device groups like NEST. And so I think they're trying to figure out what the right answer is and then come back to us with it. But I think they're still working through that, if I'm not mistaken. But anybody in that working group, please feel free to correct me there.
I was thinking, Richard, you had the vaccines working group as well. So maybe not so much the structure of the CDM, but about new vocabularies, standards of capturing. Yeah. Sorry, Mark.
One of the things we've been looking at is we've been using an open source tool called Immerse through the University of Michigan. It's free to any institution that wants to use it, and I think it's $2,500 a year to license this 1.5 million terms and phrases, set of synonyms. And what we're looking at is, okay, how many people have type 1 diabetes coded, right? Versus how many actually have type 1 diabetes mentioned throughout their notes that should be coded but isn't because it was never part of any official diagnosis or billing period. So what the idea is to provide some way of incorporating this clinically curated notes data, not NLP, but through index searching, back into OMAP as condition occurrence, where the source value comes from not a billing code, but actual, not NLP, but a group of physicians that work together on a list for a clinical trial or something else to try to identify who also has type 1 diabetes. And I'm just using that as one example. So as an example at UH, and I'm going to present this tomorrow, coded, we came up with like 6,100 something of type 1 diabetes. Mention of it in their notes, like 52,000. When you take the intersection of those two, only 6,000 actually have that coded out of the 50 something. So you have 46,000 people who have type 1 diabetes mentioned somewhere, haven't discounted family history or any of that stuff, but you know when you dig through there, there's going to be a large number that actually do have it. And how do we fit that back into the CDM somehow so we can actually add that group to the analyses for greater statistical significance, and knowing that you can have a checkbox that say include curated data that's not part of coding. I know Columbia is implementing Immerse right now. If they don't have it, they have it turned on, I believe, but it hasn't been rolled out to the population. University of Michigan, University of North Carolina, University of California, San Diego, several cancer centers are rolling it out. I don't know if Johns Hopkins is yet. I have to ask Paul Nagy about that. But I think but the beauty of it is it's open source. And when I say searching quickly through, 1.5 million patients, 35 million documents, 20-second, 10-second, 5-second searches across hundreds of synonyms and phrases. So if I pick Enbrel, I can get all the drug names through the synonyms, and I can say search across all my patients for all of that stuff. And just like that, you've got your result. Not that they're all on Enbrel, but there's some mention of consider trying Enbrel, things like that. So you do have to do work to narrow down your actual list, but it's so rapid. But I would see this, it's still, less than 10 institutions are using it, but as it is free, there is a cost associated because you are duplicating all the notes into a document repository and indexing them. But I really see a value, and one of the slides we're showing tomorrow is how we use OMAP and Immerse and go back and forth between the two. So we'll do a sophisticated query in OMAP with conditional logic and inclusion, exclusion, calculation of measurements, taking differences. Take that list and shove it into Immerse, and then do the searching through the notes to rule out things like, for example, unintentional weight loss. We want to see who has unintentional weight loss but didn't have bariatric surgery, pregnancy, things like that. Take it into Immerse and then say, well, if they mention Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig are trying to lose weight, they also don't have unintentional weight loss, right? So rule them out. So I'll stop talking now, but there's just an idea for the future. I don't know.
Yeah, this sounds to me something for the NLP working group.
It is, but it isn't, because it's not NLP. This is just saying.
But it's about storing that information from the free text as structured information.
Yeah, you're right.
And I think that's what the Node NLP table is for. And whether you do that rule-based or model-based, either way, you want to feed that back into the model, of course, that structured information, coded information.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I was thinking as you were talking, instead of that is one question, is like, how do you feed that back in? My other question is, when you say you find someone that has this word, type 1 diabetes in their note, what is your next step to verify that they have type 1 diabetes? Because I think that's kind of like a phenotyping exercise as well as potentially a data quality exercise. Right. And I think that might be really interesting, as you and this set of institutions are using it, how do you then kind of filter down the people to get the ones you really want from that 52,000? Thinking about data standards and data quality and the phenotyping working group, I think that would all kind of come together. And yeah, that'd be really interesting to me, because I think we could fold that, whatever you do there, back in to a lot of different areas.
Yeah, and so there's a ton of work to be done still, and literally we're just rolling it out institutionally. I'm doing the presentation tomorrow no pressure. I've got 20 minutes, right?
Oh my gosh.
But we've already got a whole bunch of pilot users, and we introduced it to urology yesterday, and they said for research right now it's going to be, for them it's going to be a game changer because they have an all script system. They're going to Epic, but even Epic doesn't let you do this kind of searching through things that quickly. So yeah, you're right. I mean, that's the whole thing. What are the next steps? Okay, I've got a list of 4,000 to 6,000 now. Now what do I do? What do I start doing to eliminate ones that definitely are not in the category? And then what's the feedback loop to the clinician to say, hey, you've been mentioning type 1 diabetes like the last 6 times you've seen this person, but you've never actually diagnosed it. Do they have it, right?
Yeah, well, and I can definitely see how that would be helpful for recruitment for clinical trials. Like I could definitely see that. But again, too, like there's a lot more, like it sounds like there's a lot more rich data in there. And it seems like it touches a lot of different areas.
Yeah. So I think if thrown into the NLP, I would then call the NLP group should also have it could be NLP and indexed searching or something like that, because that's what this really is. People say, well, what is that NLP? I'm like, no. David Hanauer, Michigan, wants to add NLP to it, and he's got a grant out to start adding that to it. But for now, it's more you create your sets that you use to search, and then you save those sets and share them with people. So you create a whole library of terms to search. So once you've got a really good set, you say, okay, this is what you use, and you share it with this person.
Gotcha.
And so there's the terms, there's collection of terms. If you're running a study, for example, and just a reference of that study is included in the notes saying this person's part of the premier trial, I can search for a premier trial now and pull all those patients out instantly without even, so we haven't even begun to uncover all the different ways it's going to be able to be used, but we're pretty excited about it. And OMAP, it helped us validate OMAP actually.
Well, that's really cool.
Because we threw all the structured data into the tool too, so we can search structured and unstructured in the tool.
I would be really interested in that, like how you're validating. So you're basically validating like the information that was put into your OMAP model using this tool.
So we pull out like a selection of patients, a whole bunch of data, like everything that happened to them in the course of a couple months. Then we look at the notes, and since we fed all that data into the notes, if the notes have something else in there that's not in OMAP, we know we're missing something, right? Or if OMAP has some things there that are not in the notes, then we know we actually have a problem, because the notes are actually coming directly from the EMRs. And the OMAP is coming from the enterprise data warehouse, which comes from the EMR. So there's a mapping phase there that they didn't quite do so great.
Gotcha.
So we're trying to fix that, but validating the OMAP with the Immerse, which we know just came directly from the EMRs, allows us to do that.
So one of the things that we looked at one point, because what Immerse is doing is it just basically has solar and like a solar index in the background, right? So John Duke has done something similar when he was at Regan Street, where you just take the note table, you use that as a source and run the index off of that. And then he had a separate, like Regan Street had its own like workbench, right? So you could think that you could expand Atlas to do something similar, where one of your criteria, inclusion criteria, is mention of this phrase or these terms, and you build it into Atlas, where one of the criteria is search the note table, and in the back end, Atlas would have Solar running, or it could be Elasticsearch, because it's all the same, right? The power of Immerse is the nice UI that Dan's created, and more specifically his hand curated lit concept sets that he's, or what does he call them?
Terms and
term bundles. Yeah. Those are the kind of the real nuggets of Immerse. But we could build something very similar in OHDSI, like you just add Solar or whatever or Elasticsearch into Atlas, and you're
Yeah,
very close to getting what you need.
Yeah, we actually use Solar cores at our institution just for the vocab, so there is a precedent there.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's what Athena uses, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say
I think we are deviating a bit from data standards now to application. Although, so how can we translate this to data standards? So maybe the efficient search that we discussed here of the clinical notes, I think the whole notes table is a bit underlighted in general in OMOP. It's mainly used by NLP teams to extract some structured data from that, for that kind of research. So might that be something to look into on the data standard side to see a better way, a new way to store any annotations, any structured data that you would extract from the notes?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a bit already covered, maybe?
I think that's reasonable. I mean, we're doing a study, we're doing an analysis, and we're actually looking for only the impression section of the note, right? If you have, and there's this blend between the EHR working group and NLP or note table, because how do we represent these notes? Is it just one big blob of text, or do we, if we have the sections of the notes, do we store the sections so that, you know, we know that the information that we're looking for in the radiological exam is going to be in the impression section, and so should we be able to just search the impression section, whereas right now the note table is just a blob of text.
Right. So how to parse the notes before inserting into the
right, or they might not even be parsed. Like in Epic, there is an impression table. We can just take that, like for certain modules, you can actually take the sections themselves and store them. And not for all notes, but definitely some of the ancillaries.
And also some notes, some sections, they use the same text box basically, but do structure within the text box in a certain way.
Yeah.
So you might want to extract that to get a bit more structure in your notes basically.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe it's a bridge that brings us to the ETL conventions. This is something I think Claire will also tell more about in the CDM working group, but that's basically a next step to further document the ETL conventions when mapping your data to OMOP. Because although we have a very quite rigid model and vocabulary, the way to map your data, the whole ETL process, is a bit less documented, and there's some freedom of choices there. So sure, Claire, what do we want to discuss here to have not too much overlap with the CDM?
Yeah, so I guess, you know, just as a little bit of background, a couple of years ago, we did have the Themis working group where we tried to do this, and I think they did a really good job. But we never actually enforced some of those conventions, and as we looked back, we found that some of them maybe didn't make as much sense as we initially thought, or, you know, we didn't really test them out maybe like we should have. And what I'm finding is actually, like, many of the ETL conventions that we've talked about or we wanted to implement, I actually think almost every one of them has some sort of like collaboration opportunity kind of bundled in there, because the way I see it, anytime you define an ETL convention, like if you have X data, you need to put it in the CDM in Y way. So a really good example is infusion drugs. So we've had a lot of questions from people who have mainly EHR data. How do we represent infusion drugs? Because we don't have I think it's like the denominator for the drug or like the unit of time. So how much drug over how long of a time period is this person, getting? And the EHR working group has kind of looked into it, but then they said, well, there's not a lot of analyses that have been suggested for infusion drugs. But I could see a scenario where we suggest an ETL convention for infusion drugs, and then have some sort of methods research around it to understand what analyses could we do with infusion drugs, and then if we make different choices in our conventions, what would be the implications in our analyses? Like what would we see there? And to start do some of those methods research, kind of like what the UMAIS working group has done recently, where they've been looking at different methodologies and trying to understand if we combine methods or we look at them separately, what does that do to our bias estimates, and then what does that ultimately do to our point estimates. I think we have some similar opportunities within this like ETL convention space, and so I'm just curious about if any of you have thought about that, or if you're struggling with an ETL convention, or if you have any ideas around some methods research related to that.
So are you you're saying like examining ETL choices, like maybe running a machine learning algorithm or a prediction task and saying, okay, well, the ETL, making this change in the ETL had this impact on the output. I know I've discussed this with others about like just phenotyping of like, the decisions you make in the phenotype, what are the downstream effects? You're kind of saying one step upstream, which is what are changes in how you populate the ETL to impact yeah, I guess it wouldn't be a downstream. It would have to be a different type of analysis because there's too many like layers. But
I'm also wondering, Claire, whether we should look at the analysis per se, so it needs to be set the point estimates, or more on cohort counts to make things simpler. Because this is already what we're seeing in the when we do cohort diagnostics. See the same cohort definition between databases, between data sets, leads to different results, different counts, or different concepts are needed to have people enter the cohort. And that already sees that you have a different convention, because it's not all completely standardized in the same way, using the same concepts. Yeah. It depends on how, of course, on the source, on what granularity a particular condition is captured, but also what the ETL choices are. Do you use this observation concept? Do you use this condition concept?
Yeah. Yeah, so for example, I've just initiated a study. I think what we're going to do is write a protocol first and then bring it to the community, but it's around what choices that you make around observation periods, and how do you define observation periods, and when you see a large gap of time where a person is not receiving care, do you keep that as part of your observation period? Do you drop it at some point? And then I think we're going to be looking at what those implications are on incidence rate calculations, because really, like, that's where I think we'll see the biggest difference. And so thinking through that idea, yeah, I was really thinking about like the choices that we've defined in ETL conventions, even like how we define visits, I think is very different across the community. And if you define your visits in different way, like if you're how you split out inpatient versus ER versus outpatient, and now we have all these more granular visit concepts, what does that look like? And could those choices impact downstream research? Like the paper that Patrick, and Mitch and Jill replicated at the OHDSI Symposium, their definition, their cohort definition, was based on primary diagnosis of diabetes. And if you didn't assign the primary diagnosis properly, which actually happened because I messed it up in the ETL, so I can attest that it does mess it up. It messed up the cohort counts and it totally changed their analysis. So we had to cycle back pretty quickly prior to the symposium to make sure we had the proper ETL conventions around primary diagnosis. So it's just some thoughts, like, just some potential like methods research that I think the data standards groups haven't really looked at before. And I think there's like a lot of rich opportunities there.
So we've got there's a question on the chat from Sarah. So she's asking, what about CDMs for regulatory submission? For instance, OMOP to ADAM, or negotiations with FDA, EMA to advocate the use of the OMOP CDM. This is something you might work on. So I think this is basically the reverse of what the clinical trials group is focusing on at the moment. I think that's from CDISC and mainly this SDTM, so the data collected during a study, to OMOP. But of course, the other way around, to get to use OMOP data in your studies, to move that to ADAM, ingest that there, is also very valuable. I think still a sub-question, sub-item in the clinical trials working group, so definitely post that there as well. And there's a lot of collaboration with the FDA and EMA and OHDSI, so there's a lot of cross-links. So yes, that's something that is being looked into. Anything you want to add, Claire?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think that's a lot of that work is being done by like George and Patrick at like a higher level, like George, Patrick, Peter, maybe Mark, Suchard. I think Martijn. I think they're all really collaborating closely with regulatory agencies. And I know, for example, the EMA, one of their recent NCEP documents, which is like their guidelines for pharmacovigilance research, I believe. I know they specifically reference OMOP and many of the tools that we have developed. So we know that they're looking at us. We know that they are following closely what we're doing. And I know that they're kind of talking with some of the leaders of our group so that we can respond to their needs as well as continue on with our methods research. So yes, definitely. Yeah, exactly.
FDA BEST project. Yep.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, so I'd love to hear from more of you guys. I don't know, did you guys have any studies you're starting or things you that you're interested in that you think would be a good collaboration opportunity around data standards?
There's one thing I want to mention last year I put on here as well. A trend I've been seeing lately is that there's more and more information exchange between these sub-working groups on data standards, that people from one working group are invited into the other working group to talk about their challenges, progress, conventions made. So I think that's a great thing to see, and that I think very important, all these working groups we just listed, that they're not becoming silos on their own, but working on their own conventions. So please, in these working groups, reach out to others to make sure we have everyone on board, and maybe you can learn from each other.
Yeah,
I already see that happening.
Yeah, and at our 1 o'clock meeting, so our 1 p.m. Eastern meeting, so not at the next top of the hour, but an hour later, we're going to be talking in the CDM working group more about specific ETL conventions. So we'd like to move into an ETL convention library. So we'd like to generate that, which I think would be really helpful for the community. And we're going to start talking about some potential CDM workshops. So again, some more collaboration opportunities. I'm going to be connecting with Mui and Peter to connect our APAC and our European colleagues. Yeah,
hey,
definitely.
You said what I just typed.
Yes, yes. So, and I realized like a lot of the working group time is like U.S. East timing, and sometimes West Coast, but they're not always West Coast. And so I think one thing I'd like to get better at, just in general in the community, is communication. I think we've struggled with that in the past. I think Craig has been doing a fantastic job helping us, expand our reach a little bit. But I think us as working groups need to be doing that as well, because we won't be able to collaborate if we're not communicating with each other. So, yes, really. What I think would be super helpful as collaboration opportunities are like, I think of them as like CDM workshops or data standards workshops. Like if you're new to the CDM and you need some help converting your data, if you want to move to the newest version, if you have questions about that, what are the roadblocks you foresee? If you're just having issues, maybe running one of like the tools, like say Achilles or data quality dashboard, just kind of having some open dialogue time that is just kind of like, come with what you got and we'll help you out and just offer you some support. I think that would be, I perceive it as being helpful for the community. Hopefully we'll see.
I think those would be great because we get a lot of those, right?
Yeah.
You guys don't see it because it's in all the chats that we have in the different communities in Asia Pacific. They have little chats and we try to answer as many of those as we can in those chats, but having that avenue where they can go to, where they can ask those questions would really go a far way to help, bridge the gap. I'm speaking on the Asia Pacific side, right?
Yeah.
Bridge the gap between the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere. So they don't feel as left out at times, because like you said, a lot of the working groups do happen on this side of the world and not on that side of the world. Mm-hmm. And they have very few leaders over there or experts there because of that, right? Mm-hmm. You have people like Chan, but he stays up until, 2 a.m. in the morning. That's a commitment. That's a crazy commitment for people like that, right? Yeah. You're not going to find that many that's like that. And that's the reason why you don't have those. It's the same thing when Nicole does crazy hours too. So those guys do these crazy hours and not so many people are willing to do that. Therefore, we lack a lot of experts on the Asia Pacific side because of that.
Yeah. Well, and I think, what ends up happening too, and what I've seen, Mui, is that it seems like then similar work streams kind of start up in these different groups at the same time. And so then we end up kind of being a little divergent, even though we're working on the same thing or, similar ideas.
Similar ideas, but different approaches or different, conventions, right? Like you said, trying to get everybody to do the same ETL convention is hard. Yeah. And I can tell you in Asia Pacific, they read the CDM wiki that you guys have, and then they interpret it their own way.
Yep.
Right? Because they have nobody to ask. And no offense, they're really afraid to ask in the forums because they just don't like speaking up. Okay. They will only speak up in their own little world. And it's those WeChats or Kakao Talks that we have. And, or like in the Japan ones, they just type. They won't talk. They just type. And it's hard for them to even understand what we say because their English barrier. Yeah. So, learning lessons learned is having to somehow train people over there that can speak in the native dialect. It'll go a lot faster that way. You get a lot more adaptability and a lot of adoptions that way because it just works better when it's in their native language.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's just reality. Yeah, I've been trying to avoid that, but that is just reality over there.
It is. Hard. Yeah, totally understandable. Everything. I would imagine that all like the your EMR data is all going to be coded in the native language. Correct. And so trying to translate it to English may not fully represent the true nature of, what happened to that patient. So
Yes.
I can imagine that would be really difficult.
And it'd be good, Claire, because Japan is starting up some kind of education program over there.
Mm-hmm.
I was just talking to them about yesterday. So, and I have a meeting with Mark actually tomorrow to talk about how to better educate Asia Pac as well. So it'd be good to have all these, concurrent conversations so that we can help them out a bit more.
Okay, that'd be great. Yeah. So if anyone on this call wants to join in on, I'm calling them CDM workshops. We may change the name a little bit. I don't know. But if anybody wants to join in, please let us know. I think it'd be really helpful to kind of like bridge some of those gaps around like our global community.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good opportunity to meet new people and strike up some of these collaboration opportunities with people who are doing similar work as you. So yeah, just reach out and let us know if you'd like to join.
Right,
awesome. I know we're over.
Yeah, that's okay.
I see people dropping off slowly as well.
Yeah.
Thanks for everyone who staying in there. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Have a nice one. Bye.
You too.
Nice day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.